The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This is the MCU show that I was looking the most forward to out of the MCU's entire slate of Disney Plus shows. And I'm not gonna lie, WandaVision really did make me feel much less excited to see it.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
Let's see if Falcon and the Winter Soldier is the show that can bring my interest back again. So, without any further ado, let's get this binge watch started. So episode 1 opens with a good action scene with Falcon, and I am so glad to see that they increased the budget for this show, as opposed to WandaVision where the CGI looked very shaky towards the end. And right off the bat, the cinematography for the show is much better than what we got in WandaVision. The jokes in this episode also weren't cringy like most of the MCU humor typically is, but the downside is that it felt like it was trying too hard and it just wasn't funny. Rhodey also makes an appearance in this episode, and the first big thing I observed is that I don't buy that Sam would give up the shield and reject the mantle of Captain America. Steve gave him that shield, and Sam said,
"How does it feel? Like it's someone else's."
Now, I played that line for a reason, because the show puts extra emphasis on those few words that Sam says, but it completely refuses to say the lines that followed.
It isn't.
Thank you.
I'll do my best. That's why it's yours.
Sam said that he will do his best, and his best apparently is giving the shield up the first chance he gets. This feels so out of character and also feels like they are trying to force a hard decision here. A decision that could have been hard but instead just feels contrived to give the show some added drama, which makes the ending feel less effective, but we'll get to that later. Then we get to Bucky, and I like that he is going through PTSD, and unlike the Falcon's forcefully written decision to give up the shield even though he promised Cap he would do his best, this arc with Bucky doesn't feel forced. It feels natural and it makes sense. They've beaten Thanos, and now that the war is over, he is just living life as normal, and the missions of his past is coming to haunt him, and he is trying to make amends. And then this joke was dumb.
I am no longer the Winter Soldier. I am James Bucky Barnes, and you're part of my efforts to make amends.
Just say I am no longer the Winter Soldier and goodbye. Your days of getting me to do your dirty work is over. You're not gonna hurt anyone ever again. That's it. But this was a dumb MCU joke again. And it reminds me of a joke from Terminator Genesis when the Terminator is trying to act more social.
Hello, calories. It is nice to meet you.
This just shows the kind of humor that the MCU has. It's comparable to Terminator Genesis. And that is not something I want to be comparing the humor to when I watch the first episode of this show. Now, going back to the good stuff, at first Bucky's hanging out with this old dude, and I was wondering why, and who is this guy? But then you find out that the guy that he killed earlier in his nightmare/flashback scene was this man's son. And the guilt in Bucky's face, really, that was a great and surprising moment, and I thought it was awesome. And the guilt hits him again when the girl he goes out with brings it up and describes the pain of a parent losing a kid. And again, you can see the look of guilt just building and building on his face and how it is eating away at him. And this was effective stuff. He leaves his date and goes to the old man's house because I can only assume that he was going to admit to what he did, but then doesn't when he realizes how much pain it will cause the man. And again, this just adds to the weight of Bucky's situation and his mental state. And I can tell you that of the two characters and their struggles, I was far more interested in Bucky's storyline as opposed to Sam's. And now it's time to talk about the ending, which honestly could have been so great, but in the end, just didn't work. Now, if the writers changed the reason why Sam can't be Captain America, such as instead of giving up the shield himself, he wanted to be Captain America and honor the promise to Steve at the end of Endgame, and the government told him, no, you can't be Captain America. That's not your choice. That wasn't Steve Rogers' choice, even though Steve Rogers said that he could, and then they chose this guy. Then yeah, this ending would be more impactful and show that Sam is losing his family's house, and he has lost the shield and the title of Captain America that his friend gave to him. And if that happened, I would feel for him in this moment. But the fact that he willingly gave up the shield at the beginning and had no second thoughts about giving it up when he had talked to Rhodey, it really made this ending lack the proper impact that it needed. It would have showcased the hypocritical side of society, and it would have just been a much more emotional and impactful ending to the episode. But as it stands, I'm just thinking, you gave up the shield shield and title so easily, and now we are supposed to care that they gave it to someone else. You honestly shouldn't be caring this much at all. Oh, and the storyline of Sam losing his family's house is nothing special. It feels like a generic storyline that is supposed to give this show some extra plot. We have seen this kind of storyline in so many movies and TV shows, and it doesn't even compare to Bucky's situation. He has a lot of emotional baggage, and seeing him have to come to grips with it is very fascinating to me, and by far the best thing about this episode. So yeah, this was a good start to the show. Certainly much better than the first 2 episodes that we got to WandaVision, and it gets a 7 out of 10. And do you know what's funny and also quite sad at the same time? I feel like this is going to be Henry Cavill's reaction when Warner Brothers reveal their Black Superman. His reaction and ours. Except Marvel have race changed this particular superhero in a very smart way, and Warner Brothers are just trying to pander and see if it makes them money. Not to mention, they already kind of did worse than this by officially announcing the Black Superman on Henry Cavill's birthday recently. I mean, that is just evil. Oh, and I did like the music in this episode. The more quiet music was decent, but the louder action music was just typical Marvel music. And that first action scene was good for the episode, but it's not an action scene I would want to see again. They definitely put in the money, but it just didn't feel as cinematic with its choreography as the action scenes are in the MCU movies. Okay, 6 days later, and finally I got to watching episode 2. I didn't realize until I waited this long, but that kind of shows that the first episode didn't fully win me over. So we opened with a little backstory for the new Captain America guy, and as expected with this TV show format, they're going to give him some additional development. Although I do think it's bull how everyone is cheering for this new Captain America. Everyone knows the history of Steve Rogers, and not everyone would immediately accept this guy as the new Captain America, no questions asked. So I don't buy how everyone welcomed him with open arms. You would definitely have some people in the crowd that would yell, "You suck," or something. And there would also be talk out there from other people who would want him to give up the shield. And Bucky visits Sam and calls him on his bullshit, saying that, "Why did you give up the shield? Steve gave you that shield. This is not what you wanted." And I am 100% on Bucky's side here. Everything Sam said, I wasn't convinced. I made a decision is what he keeps on saying, but he doesn't give a bloody reason why he made that decision and went against the promise he made to Cap.
Thank you.
I'll do my best.
They really are doing a terrible job at explaining his reasoning for this. It feels like they just wanted to give him some weight and drama behind his decision, and it's horribly done. There's no grounds or reasoning for it. I hope they bloody well give one. And I gotta say, for all the good CGI I've seen so far in this show, this fall looked cheap. And again, the humor didn't work for me, although I did smile at the Hobbit joke when Bucky says he read it.
How do you know about Gandalf?
I read The Hobbit in 1937 when it first came out.
You're Welcome, by the way, was a good joke in my opinion. The rest felt like it was trying too hard. The best dialogue between these two is when they are just being serious. Serious and talking about Steve, serious and talking about the situation at hand, and serious by saying that they are not working with the new Captain America. I like their dialogue when they are not using forced humor. It really is well written in that regard. And something that we learn is that the people they are going up against are all super soldiers like Bucky, and the action scene we got here was okay. I mean, it really wasn't anything special at all. The Mandalorian had an action scene very similar to this on top of a moving vehicle, and that was actually really good and creative and very energetic and adrenaline filled. This just feels like a cheaper discount version in comparison. The best part of the action is when the new Captain America uses the shield. He used it in some creative ways, and I was impressed with that. I even like how the new Captain America says to Bucky and Sam that he is not trying to replace Steve Rogers, and it shows some legitimacy on his part, like he's not really as much of an uptight replacement as you might initially think when you saw him at the end of episode 1. And I like how Sam and Bucky don't like or even feel comfortable sitting opposite him. It makes perfect sense where all three of these characters are coming from. These are the parts of this show that I thought I would like, and they don't disappoint. I just wish the tone was more consistent and the jokes were actually funny and controlled, like they were in The Winter Soldier, but right now, I feel like there are tonal inconsistencies with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is the biggest problem to me right now. And I do fear how this is going to progress going forward, given that this is the MCU after all, and the Russo brothers are not here to keep the comedy at a good level. Speaking of which, we get another dumb joke about Bucky staring. I mean, the MCU don't have to joke about everything. I mean, God forbid, can you imagine if the MCU made something with Batman and they said, "Does Batman always brood like that?" Just let him brood. You don't have to be self-aware and bring attention to everything, you know. These personality traits make these characters. Embrace them. Don't mock or make fun of them. Although I will say that the Black Falcon and Black Kid joke was cute. Also, I'm gonna call Falcon Black Falcon for the rest of this video because it's funny. Although I do find it weird that after that conversation he has with the kid that he says to Bucky,
So you're telling me
that there was a black super soldier decades ago and nobody knew about it.
Just call him a super soldier. Why does him being black make any difference? That was a pointless little detail. And this whole therapy scene at the end was just pointless. It was a scene that was just used to throw a myriad of jokes at us, and it wasn't even funny. Now again, when they get serious afterwards and talk about Steve and why Black Falcon threw the shield away like it was nothing, I liked that part of the conversation. But why did it have to be done with a forced therapy session? Why did it have to be done with both of them bringing their legs so close together? Why did it have to be done with them both giving each other a staring contest? It really shouldn't have been done in this forced therapy scenario. They should have had this conversation take place on a plane, or maybe it got heated and they actually had this conversation as they were leaving the building. It's like when Happy called Peter to the bathroom to congratulate him in Spider-Man Homecoming. The only reason he called him to the bathroom was so they could do a joke of someone coming out and interrupting their conversation, and then the scene takes place outside. This felt like another version of that. Just have the main conversation and cut out the forced humor, because the forced humor really does undercut this scene, which is really well acted and really well written. And the episode ends with the two going to see Zemo so they can ask him about the super soldiers. So yeah, aside from the complaints I mentioned, this was a good episode. The reason is because it had a lot of serious scenes and development between the characters. This is the first time where Bucky and Black Falcon meet each other in the show, and I like the furthering resentment they have for Walker. And it really emphasizes how much they miss Steve Rogers and how they get defensive when this new guy has his shield. It makes me miss Steve Rogers even more, and I especially feel for Bucky in this situation because he feels exactly as I do about Sam. I just think the reasoning that the writers have given Sam for giving up the shield is still not convincing or in character for him. Certainly not in character for how the Russo brothers portrayed him in their own movies. I will say though that this episode certainly made a much better impression on me than the first episode. So much so that I can definitely tell you I won't be waiting another 6+ days before I watch the next episode. So this episode gets an 8 out of 10. I'm still not convinced with Falcon's reasoning for not taking up the mantle of Captain America after saying to Steve,
Thank you.
I'll do my best.
he clearly didn't try at all, and I feel it really takes away from this awesome moment in Endgame. So they still need to convince me on this. Episode 3 opens with Walker doing a raid, and we see that he has a bit of a temper, which is showing some clear Homelander vibes. We then see Bucky having a conversation with Zemo, and it was a very good but short conversation. And Bucky very quickly comes to the conclusion that we should break Zemo out of prison. That was quick, and here he is.
If I may.
No!
That's very funny, Buzz. This is serious!
Yeah, I have no problem with this as a storyline, but I do think they teamed up with Zemo way too quickly. I mean, the characters meet him, talk to him, recruit him, and break him out of prison, and the opening titles haven't even shown up yet. And you know that he is going to betray them, I'm calling it right now. And it doesn't take him long to cross the line. So yeah, I'm not exactly happy with that. They needed to dedicate more time to this, as it's no small thing to break a villain out of prison. As is, it just felt crazy rushed. So they set off on their mission, and I really like the colour of the city that they arrive in. It looks very John Wick inspired. Although I will say that the backgrounds look a bit too colourful at times, to the point that it looks like a CGI cutscene you would expect in a video game. So we get an action scene with Bucky, and it was okay. There was too much quick cut editing, and it didn't compare to any of his fight scenes in The Winter Soldier or Civil War. And Disney Plus have these big budgets where they can really make those action scenes on streaming. So yeah, I do wish they do better. And speaking of John Wick, I like how there was some blood when this shot happened. It was a nice bit of grit that the MCU films were severely lacking. But anyway, we have a bit of a John Wick fight, and the fight scene ended as soon as it started. I mean, they could have let it go on for a bit, and then Sharon Carter shows up and helps them out, and she gives some exposition about how she got here, and it turns out that she wasn't let off the hook for stealing Steve's shield for him in Civil War, which is interesting to see. She agrees to help them in next to no time, and we go to a club for a few seconds and then we are out. I gotta say, the pacing of this episode is feeling very choppy. Plot lines, action scenes, and characters are being introduced so quickly, and they're not being given the appropriate amount of time to be fleshed out. I didn't think I would say this, but they need to slow down and just let the episode breathe. Everything is going by so fast, it feels like they are missing out on some really cool and important stuff. Anyway, they find Dr. Nagel or something, and then a fight happens with Sharon, who's covering for Bucky and Falcon, and it was surprisingly better than the one with Bucky. It was the first action scene in this show that I really liked. Again, I also like that we see a tad bit of blood in the action scene if you really look for it, but then they will have her stab people and all you hear are the sound effects. You can barely even see her holding a knife and you don't see any blood. And then we get some blood again when Zemo shoots this guy. Oh, and Zemo escapes. And I love this attack that Bucky gives this woman. That is cool, although it does remind me of the same attack in Aquaman. And then Zemo shows up, and get a load of this poorly written bullshit, just so they can keep Zemo in the show.
You're going back to jail.
Do you want to find Carly or not?
He's right. We need him, and there's 2 of us and at least 20 of them. Come on.
Fine. But if you try that shit again...
Wouldn't dream of it.
I mean, what the hell? No, what just happened here? Why did Zemo cause that whole scene like he was betraying the characters and then escape and then come back to them again a few seconds later? And they just let him off the hook and let him come with them again. This is really bad writing. They're not taking extra precautions, and Zemo just showed that he can't be trusted and that he can easily escape from these two, but they act like it's no big deal. Anyway, here's something you didn't expect me to say. I really did like this joke.
You're not gonna move your seat up, are you?
No.
See, I bring up the good jokes when I see them. This was a funny reference to the joke in Civil War, and it was much funnier this time round. And Walker finds out that Zemo has escaped, and he knows that Bucky and Sam are behind it. And I like how everyone is calling Sam on his bullshit for not taking the shield. Sharon calls him out on it, Bucky calls him out on it again, and even Zemo calls him on it. You know that's bad when even the guy who hates superheroes tells you should have taken the damn superhero shield. But Sam doesn't bloody learn. He now thinks that he should have destroyed the shield instead of taking it. He really is a fool, isn't he? Again, whatever his reasoning, which they still don't make clear, I don't buy it. It's not being conveyed well at all, and it goes against his promise to Cap that the Russo brothers wrote for him. This definitely feels like 2 competing visions with Falcon, and it comes off as forced drama that doesn't work in the grand scheme of this show and what came before it. Like I explained earlier, there were better ways they could have done it. Also, we get a cheap-ass explosion in this scene. I'm surprised how cheap the explosions look on this big budget show, especially when they looked so good in the first episode. The episode ends with Bucky finding out that someone is following them. He splits from Falcon and Zemo, and he says, "I was wondering when you were gonna show up," and it turns out that it was one of the guards from Black Panther. I can't remember her name though, and she is here looking for Zemo because, not surprisingly, Wakanda has not forgotten that Zemo killed their king in Civil War. So that was cool, and then the episode ends. So, what did I think of this episode? Well, I think that the pacing was completely off. Both Zemo and Sharon joined the team in the same episode, and everything about their team up felt so quick and sloppily put together. They really needed to slow the pacing of the episode down and let these scenes develop, because they just happened so quickly it was actually quite disorienting. And then we spent like half a minute in the club, only to then cut to the next scene. The editing felt very choppy in this episode, and it's so frustrating because I like the stuff that happens in this episode. I just don't like how it was rushed and clumsily thrown together. The special effects are also starting to look cheaper than they did at the beginning of the show, and the story is being told in a way which is very sloppy. On paper, this should have been my favorite episode, because it has a bunch of stuff in it that I like. Having to team up with the villain, breaking the villain out of prison, finding another character that has gone through horrible events in their past, and then topping it off with other well-known characters that get thrown into the mix, because they now have an emotional stake to it. These are things I really like, but it turned out to be the worst episode so far for all the reasons that I mentioned, and more that I didn't get into. And it gets a 6 out of 10. Also, what an idiot. I mean, Sam, seriously, you kept your phone on. You aren't a newbie in the field. You've been at this for a long time. You should not be pulling silly amateur mistakes like this. And then he screwed up the rebound. He gave himself away even more by just staring at her like a guilty child. Just put your damn phone down and say, "I'm sorry about that." So, where were we? There were just too many problems in this episode that really brought it down for me. So, yeah, 6 out of 10. So we open in Wakanda 6 years ago, where Bucky is being trained to control his super soldier mind programming, and he manages to control it, and this was a really good scene. Again, I just wish the scene was a little longer, because Sebastian Stan's performance in this one scene was one of his best, and I would have liked to spend more time with it. And this perfectly establishes even more that Bucky is indebted to Wakanda for helping him. Regardless, they have a conversation, and they come to an agreement that Wakanda will come for Zemo in 8 hours. We then see that the Flag Smasher's reckless actions has killed innocent people who did nothing wrong, and even though the show is trying to portray them as morally ambiguous with their actions, they seem quite evil now, that's for sure. Our characters go asking around to find the leader of the Flag Smashers, and everyone leaves when they ask, except for this one guy, but he might as well have left because his response was as good as everyone else's. And Zemo very smartly gets an answer from some kids as to where she is, and he gets the answer, but he doesn't tell the other two, and he tells the kids not to trust them, which is very clever on his part. Although Bucky asks him what the kids told him, but because he told Zemo earlier that the Wakandans are coming for him in 8 hours, Zemo says he's not going to tell them everything he knows about Madani because he wants some leverage on them for his own benefit later. So in other words, if Zemo didn't know that Wakanda was after him, he would have shared the information with them. You shouldn't have told him, Bucky. And I like when he loses his cool on Zemo and Sam has to calm him down. That was a nice buddy cop moment, and it's what superhero duos usually do when one loses control, and I always like moments like this in superhero films. So Walker finds them and joins them in their crusade. They have an argument over how they should approach the leader of the Flag Smashers, which ends in Sam's favor, and Sam thinks that he can talk Madani down, which made me smile because that is very much how Barry in The Flash would constantly try to talk and find the goodness in the bad guys. Heck, they're even given a 10-minute time limit by Walker. I mean, even Deadpool attempts this with Fire Fist because he's just a kid and Cable gives him a time limit. So he talks to her, and the thing is, I see her side and I agree with her sentiments, but I disagree with her methods, which involve killing innocent people. It's kind of like the same thing we thought about Thanos and Killmonger, and Sam thinks the same thing. He tries to talk her down, and Walker is starting to get really aggravated. He loses patience, they all come in, and she thinks it was a trap, and she tries to escape. And in that time, Zemo escapes. Again, he catches up to Madani, and he finds the super soldier serum, and he destroys it. And then... bullshit. That should have killed him, but not even a scratch. And Walker takes one of the serums for himself, which they set up very briefly with his little confrontation with Bucky. He clearly wants more strength like Captain America, and he wants to do better, but feels limited and not as strong as he needs to be to do the job that everyone needs him to do. So I hope they delve into that a bit more before they have him inevitably take the serum. By the way, I love this bit.
Shouldn't have given him the shield.
I didn't give him the shield.
Well, Steve definitely didn't.
Anytime Sam gets crap for that, I love it. He still hasn't given a reason for why he gave up the shield. He keeps saying, I made a choice, but we still don't know why he made that choice. Choices have thought behind them and reasoning, they don't just happen on their own. Anyway, Walker comes to take Zemo with force, and then... Wakanda shows up. An awesome fight between everyone breaks out, and this is the best fight scene of the season so far. Zemo gets the slip on them again, however, and escapes. And I like Walker's slow depression. When the fight is over, he says they weren't even super soldiers and they managed to beat him. This is really great, and is the kind of development that I wanted to see from him. We just need a bit more, and then if he takes the serum, it will be perfectly set up. Now, Madani plays a very dirty game. She calls Sam sister, and that is crossing the line. She even threatens to see her kids if she doesn't do what she says, and Walker has a conversation with his partner asking him a not so hypothetical question if he would take the serum if he had the chance, and his partner is like, hell yeah. So that's it. They've set this up really well. Now they can just have him take it, and I would totally understand. So Sam and Bucky meet her where she demanded, and rightfully so, Sam is pissed off with her. They are about to have another chat, which could have become civilized, but then Walker shows up to arrest Carly and her crew. A big fight breaks out, and I gotta say, the action in this episode is far better than the action in all of the previous episodes. And this final action scene is no different. It had a couple of stupid jokes which really didn't need to be in there, but aside from that, this was an awesome climax. We also see that Walker's attacks are much more powerful, and this means that he took the serum. And I like that he took the serum off screen, so we don't know for sure when he takes it, and we find out during the battle. It turns out that his partner gets killed, however, by Carly, and you don't see their friendship for long in this show, but I really felt for Walker when that happened. And he gets royally pissed off, and he runs for the first henchman he finds, and he goes all Homelander on his ass. And again, there is some blood in this episode, which, all I can say is, finally Marvel, the scene is more mature in its execution, and there is no dumb joke to ruin the moment of his villainous transformation.
I can't afford that.
I thought this was the anti-gravity gun.
What? No, that's that one.
This character has transformed into a villain, and you feel the impact of it, especially when the whole world sees it too. So this is undoubtedly going to spell trouble for him in the next episode, and that is going to drive him even deeper into insanity. And without his partner in crime to give him a leveled head, he is going to feel isolated, and in addition to that, that serum isn't going to be doing his mind any favors either. So I love this transformation he has into a villain, and he is now my favorite character of the whole show. Also, he killed Carly's best friend, so she's gonna really feel his loss. And it's her actions that led to his death in the first place, so I can imagine that she's going to feel intense guilt as the episode goes on. So yeah, this was a very good episode, definitely the best of the season so far, and I give it a strong 8 out of 10. I can't wait to see what happens next, and with only 2 episodes to go, I'm assuming that it should be very well paced and should certainly not be padding itself out. So the episode opens and we see Walker running away, and you can see he has realized what he has just done. And you can see that he is a broken man, and he looks like he's lost himself. And you actually feel for him. until he chooses the way of denial and doesn't further question what he does. Bucky and Falcon show up, ask him to calm down, then to give them the shield. Walker refuses and a fight breaks loose. And this fight is awesome because they are fighting him for what he's done, but at the same time, they're fighting for their friend's shield and what he has done with it. And this action scene was awesome. There were a couple of oddly executed hits with the filmmaking of the action, but overall it was awesome. And this is the first time I really felt the teamwork between Bucky and Sam. And it was more brutal, which I really like. They even break Walker's arm in a really creative way. Although I was thinking that Sam was unevenly matched in this fight. Both Walker and Bucky are super soldiers, but Sam is just as human as Walker's partner, and if his name wasn't in the title, then he would also be gone pretty quickly too. The only strange thing about this action scene is that they used the music from Civil War when Wanda turns on Vision, and it worked well, but then the music abruptly cut off. And at the end of the fight, they used the music from Infinity War when Star-Lord finds out Gamora is dead. It makes me wonder if they didn't have time to compose some new music for the episode, so they used music from the previous soundtracks, even if it didn't fit the runtime of the scene, because they cut the first one off very abruptly. But yeah, great action scene, and a great way to start the episode. And I like how Bucky drops the shield to Sam, essentially saying, "Here, it's yours, take it this time," and then he walks away, and then we get the titles. This was the best opening to an episode of this show, and if it keeps this energy up, this could actually be my favorite episode. We then see Walker losing his role as Captain America, and I like when he says to the people that are discharging him,
I only ever did what you asked of me, what you told me to be and trained me to do, and I did it.
which is very true, as in real life, these people in high positions do contribute in a huge way to the kinds of people they send out. And then this woman quickly shows up and offers Walker an ambiguous opportunity and says that she will be in touch, whatever that means. We'll see how it ties into the rest of the show, which is wrapping up very soon. Meanwhile, Bucky finds Zemo and hands him to Wakanda, and he asks them for a favor, which we will find out later, I suppose. And again, I liked the "you're welcome" that they throw back and forth between each other. It's a funny yet subtle joke of the two trying to top each other, and Bucky brings something to Sam and says this is the favor that he asked for from Wakanda, and I'm guessing it's a new set of wings for him, seeing as he lost his previous pair in his battle with Walker. And I even liked the joke when Sam asked Bucky why he didn't use his metal hand. It's like half a joke, but half a real conversation.
Why didn't you use the metal arm?
Well, I don't always think of it immediately. I'm right-handed.
See, you don't just need silly quips, Marvel. A joke to further develop and have a conversation is all that you need too. Balance the joke and the conversation, and it works. And watching Sam try to get this board out the normal way, and then Bucky does it in one stroke with his metal arm, that is the funniest joke between these two in the entire show. Even the slight flirting he does with Sam's sister was funny, as opposed to having them joke about Bucky's stare or some stupid childish shit like that. And meanwhile, Walker goes to see the family of his partner, and it was here that I realized that they actually go further back than I thought. I just wish we saw a bit more of their friendship. Also, I know they're trying to make it look nice and cute that a couple of kids are playing with Captain America's shield, but it's less sweet and innocent when you remember that not long ago, someone used the shield to cut someone's head off. Just because you can't see the blood, kids, doesn't mean it wasn't there. Sam and Bucky even have a nice conversation later whilst having some target practice with the shield, and they both give each other a motivational talk. It's mostly directed from Sam to Bucky, and it's a good conversation between the two. And the episode ends with this little brat hiring a villain that wants revenge on Falcon. And then she gets a bunch of new recruits, and then we cut to Sam opening up the briefcase from Wakanda, which I can only assume is his new wings. And most likely a costume, seeing as he won't be staring this long at some wings. And also, because this scene reminds me a lot of the scene in Spider-Man 3, which also involved a briefcase and a suit. And it also reminded me of that scene in Smallville when Clark sees his Superman costume for the very first time. So yeah, there was no real surprise here. If anything, I think it spoiled that Falcon has a new suit, to be honest. And then we get a mid-credit scene where Walker is forging something, his very own shield. Although, it clearly isn't made out of vibranium, so it's infinitely inferior. I will say that I was surprised to see no big cliffhanger at the end of the episode. I guess they will just have to build the stakes at the beginning of the next episode, which is also the final episode of the show. So yeah, this episode started out very strong and was really good, and I thought it would be my favourite episode and the story would really kick into high gear, but then it slowed all the way down and it just became good and not really good. And the conversation between Sam and the Black Super Soldier, it was a tragic backstory, but it honestly feels like they used used this scene way too late, because now Sam has been given a very good reason to question whether he should take the shield, but we've got one episode left and we know he's going to take it. So they should have actually found a way to work this conversation into the first episode, so then we understand why Sam doesn't want to take the shield, and then when Bucky and everyone has the conversation with him, we understand why he didn't take it. But unfortunately, it feels like they didn't give him a reason at the beginning of the show, and they give him a reason now at the end of the show, even though in the very next episode we know he's going to take the shield. I feel like they did a real big problem here. They should have put this plot point from episode 5 into episode 1. Instead, they put it in episode 5, right when we know the Falcon is going to take the shield. So I think this is a big problem. I now have a reason for why Falcon doesn't want to take the shield, but they positioned his reasoning way too late in the show, and I honestly see that as a huge problem. And the whole thing with the boat that Sam's sister wants to sell, then says she doesn't want to sell, it felt like padding or just generic TV show drama, and it kind of felt like a waste of time. I also wanted to see more of the depression and downfall of John Walker, but even he pretty much disappears from most of this episode, which is a shame because the last episode and the opening of this episode really made me fascinated by his character, to the point that it made him my new favorite character, and now it looks like he's just gearing up for the final battle in the finale, where I assume that he will get overshadowed by everything else that's going on. So yeah, this was a good episode, but not a great episode, and it hasn't gotten me super pumped to see the finale, which is something that every good show really needs to do. So this episode gets a 7 out of 10. It was good, but could have been a lot better, and I feel like the more I think about it, the more I'm gonna be disappointed by it. Okay, it's time to watch the final episode and give my concluding thoughts on the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Okay, the final episode opens with Bucky and Falcon arriving at the battle scene, and Sharon shows up and is in disguise because otherwise she'll be in serious trouble. And then she drops the disguise and goes back to using her normal face. Not very smart. And Sam makes an entrance with his new set of wings and with Captain America's shield. It's about time. And he even calls himself Captain America, although I don't know what changed his mind from whatever it was that put him off in the first place. I gotta say though, there's some cool filmmaking shots in this episode. They are very brief and only last a couple of seconds, but I definitely noticed them. We get an all-out battle, all of our characters participate, including Walker, and it was cool. Certainly much better to me than that embarrassing final fight in WandaVision. There was some really weird stuff, however. There was no impact or heavy landing to Bucky's superhero landing here, which was bizarre, and this truck dangling down from the platform looked so fake. They should have tried to do this practically, given that this is supposed to be a more grounded story and less of a typical superhero film, but the MCU being so CGI happy just did it in the computer, and they clearly didn't have the budget for it. I don't understand how something like Shazam was able to do this effect in broad daylight, where it's much harder to hide the CGI's imperfections, but the Falcon and the Winter Soldier tries it at night, where they can cover up a lot of the imperfections, and it still looks fake. And also, this rescue was pure bullshit. Sam is not a super soldier, so how was he able to push this car back up? The jetpack doesn't make a difference. So this save where everyone embraces him as Captain America, it fell flat on its face, because the crowd is cheering and I am just confused and unimpressed. It also turns out that Sharon is really the power broker, Falcon faces off against Carly and he doesn't fight back, and this whole time I could tell that Sharon was going to shoot her. That wasn't a surprise. And yeah, she dies, and I don't care, because I actually started to get very bored of this plot line, and if she was around any longer, it would have kept going, so I'm glad it stopped. It honestly should have stopped sooner, and the focus should have gone to John Walker. So Falcon gives a speech to the senators and people in high positions of power.
The terrorists only set us back a bit.
You have to stop calling them terrorists.
What else would we call them? Your peacekeeping troops carrying weapons are forcing millions of people into settlements around the world, right? What do you think those people are going to call you?
And that little bit was the best part of this whole speech. I do think that the speech went on for a bit long though, plus these senators don't give a shit. They know what they do is wrong and unfair to everyone else, and rigged to work in their favor, and they are going to go back to the way things are. They're emotionless, selfish hacks. So this is definitely a complete fantasy when he preaches to these senators. But the message is clear, it just needs to be condensed a little more. Also, Walker helped them in the battle, and it seemed that he ends with them in good terms. We will talk about this. And the remaining flag smashers get blown up as they are being taken to prison, and then we get this woman again who I completely forgot about, and she shows up to set up future MCU projects. Then we get a bunch of concluding arcs, Walker becomes a good guy again and becomes an agent, Bucky tells the old man that he killed his son, the Black Super Soldier has his story documented in the museum right next to Steve Rogers, and the characters have a family barbecue in the end. And then we have a mid-credit scene with Sharon Carter. She is pardoned for her past actions, and she's happy, but she's going to turn into a villain now, it seems. Let's just hope she makes a better villain than Karli. So, that was the final episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and it had a heck of a lot of problems. But before we talk about that, what did I think of this final episode overall? Well, first of all, this is how you do a black version of a white superhero, as opposed to what Warner Brothers are forcibly trying to do with Black Superman, which, from what I hear, is just a forced attempt at diversity as they are hoping it will attract the Black Panther audience. So you can clearly see that they are doing the very definition of pandering, as opposed to the MCU, which gave the original character a complete arc first, and then passed the mantle on to the next character. Henry Cavill's Superman didn't even get a complete arc, and Warner Brothers are just trying to sloppily and forcibly replace him. And there was some cool action in this episode, and the whole episode was decently paced, so overall, this was a good episode. But as the finale to the entire season, this was so rushed and slapped together. First of all, I'm disappointed with Walker. Now don't get me wrong, I really like his character, but I feel like they built him up, they had him act out, they had him discharged, and then they didn't really know what to do with him. He just became good in the end, even though the downward spiral he was going through was so fascinating. And to have him stand next to Bucky in the end like he could stand by the heroes was just wrong and did not work at all. And as many people have brought up, he should have been sent to prison for even being there. So in that sense, I am very disappointed with how his arc ended up. I mean, I guess I don't mind him being good, but you need to give him a convincing redemption arc. You can't just do such a good job at turning him evil and then flip a switch and say, he's good now. That's the kind of childish MCU stuff I can't stand. It feels like they were trying to be mature by setting him up, but then they just couldn't go through with it because we're the MCU, we're Disney Marvel. We can't go that dark and deep. And the actual villain of the show, she just started to annoy me after a while and I found her boring. Walker should have been the main villain that was being built up in the background and then took over for the rest of the season. And even the final closing shot of this show was also very lackluster. And I was like, oh, is the show over now? Well, okay then, time to get back to the rest of my day. Let's go watch something that I know will be awesome. The 1 hour and 10-minute first episode to The Bad Batch, which is a Clone Wars sequel. It's funny how an animated show puts the debuts of both of the MCU's shows to shame with regards to his first episode length. Also, the confession that Bucky gave to his friend was done so quickly and just glossed over. And I really wanted to see the conversation that would happen after that. I don't care if it was gonna be ugly, it just had to happen. And it felt crazy rushed and like Marvel didn't want to show this mature part of the story. And that did make this part of the story that I really loved and had great build up have a lackluster payoff. I feel like Fox's Marvel or Sony's Marvel or DC would have shown the ugly and emotional side of a scene like this, but the MCU just cut it off. It felt very immature of them to do that. And then they showed this later to say that his relationship with the old man is over, but it would have been so much more powerful if we saw this after the breakdown that he would have had with the old man. I mean, imagine if the scene where Billy Batson in Shazam meets his mother, and then he just opens the door, says I'm your son, and then it just cuts away. It's like, no, you commit to it, you show the rest of it. You need to show the emotional scenes. Just cutting away, this feels like Marvel just wussing out. Like they don't know how to make this an emotional scene, so they just cut away from it. And normally I say people have different opinions and stuff when it comes to this kind of stuff, but I'm just gonna say it. If anyone defends this, then they are just covering up for Marvel. Because the whole point of having drama in movies, TV shows, or anything is to give you that moment where it really tugs at your heartstrings and makes you want to tear up. And potentially I could have teared up with this and it would have really spoke to the quality of this show, but they just cut away from it. And there was no payoff. This moment to me was the boner moment from WandaVision. It really took one of my most favorite parts of Bucky's arc and gave it a completely lackluster resolution. So, that was the final episode of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and like I said, it had a heck of a lot of problems, but it just scraped over into being good. It didn't blow me away or anything, but there was enjoyment to be had. But the missteps were just huge missteps, and I give this episode a 6 out of 10. It didn't blow me away or anything, but I enjoyed it. The show overall was good fun whilst I was watching it, but I feel like I will quickly forget about it. It tried to be like The Winter Soldier, which is my favorite MCU movie, but I don't think it was anywhere near as smart, well executed, or even as memorable as that movie. I think Falcon had the worst arc out of this entire show. I didn't buy his sudden reluctance to turn down the shield, and because I didn't buy that, once he embraced the shield, it felt like, well, yeah, you should have done that in the first place. Why didn't you? What changed now? I thought it, all the characters thought it, the only one that didn't for some reason was Sam. It felt like the showrunners wanted Sam to reject the shield to give his transformation some drama, but I think that it was very poorly handled and it felt forced. But to fool you into thinking that his non-existing dilemma was deep and important, they had him say political buzzwords about his rights.
You're not going to come here in your overextended life and tell me about my rights. Maybe this is something you or Steve will never understand. But can you accept that I did what I thought was right?
Yeah, you might have some people fooled, Marvel, but you're not fooling me. Sam's dilemma was just piss poor writing, and using buzzwords about someone's rights is not going to hide that. And I buy Sam as Captain America in the end, and I really liked seeing him as Captain America as well, way more than I thought I would, but the struggle they gave him was absolutely non-existent. But by the time we got to episode 5, he was given a genuinely good new reason to not want to be Captain America. But then he more or less immediately decides to embrace the shield, and that struggle was over as soon as it started. It just felt super rushed and incoherent, and it didn't work the way the showrunner wanted it to. Sam should have been given the struggle in episode 1, not episode 5. But yeah, with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, no single episode really blew me away to the point that I would give them a 9 or a 10 out of 10. They just got 6, 7s and 8s for me, and that will be reflected in my overall score for the show. Overall, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier gets a 6 out of 10. I will say that this is the most mature thing that the MCU has put out in a while, and I'm thankful for that, but they didn't deliver on it in the end. The mature themes felt neutered and diluted, and the season ends very neatly with a bow. I think they really need to make the story commit to a certain storyline. I feel like the Flag Crushers had way too much focus, and that was a mistake, as they are the most boring part of this entire show. And I kept thinking to myself, how are these people so hard for you to take down? They're nobodies. I think they really should have been used as a means to boost up John Walker and give him a purpose and origin story to become this new villain. Something that was always there, but only came to be because of the Flag Smashers. And that would have been so much better than having him turn good and become a US agent in the end. I mean, I honestly think they took one of the best things to come out of this show and ended it in the safest and worst possible way. I mean, towards the end of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I started to watch Star Wars The Bad Batch, which is a sequel to the amazingly dark and mature The Clone Wars series. And the questions that the Bad Batch ask themselves and the things they learn from the refugees and the small number of rebels is far more mature and powerful than the Falcon's entire political speech. And the Bad Batch did it in a way that was educational and meaningful, whilst also telling its story, and it didn't even once preach about it. That's how you tell the story. It managed to talk about its political messages without deviating from the story, whereas Falcon and the Winter Soldier put everything on hold and essentially said, let me talk to you about politics. The Clone Wars and the Bad Batch even have darker material regarding war, such as showing violent war crimes, which is fitting commentary considering the big war crimes we are seeing in the world right now. And it is very tight with its lore and world building, and it's also very tight with the other storylines from the other Star Wars shows and films. It's not inconsistent and retconning things like having Zemo be from a family of rich people, even though he was portrayed as a regular citizen who hated the superheroes in Civil War. And they don't have their characters change their motivations with poor writing. And that is a show that I am looking forward to watching every week. I haven't felt that in a show for a very long time. And by the way, as I was working on this video, the rest of my family watched this show and they just found it boring. They found it to be very slow. I even asked them if Sam gave a reason why he didn't take the shield and if I just missed it. And they said, no, he didn't give a reason why he gave up the shield. So yeah, my family aren't even as critical of the MCU as I am, but even they didn't like this show. It wasn't even fun to talk to them about it afterwards because there was nothing really noteworthy to talk about. And teaming up with Zemo so quickly, I mean, that should have been treated as a much bigger decision, but The Falcon and the Winter Soldier treated it like a kiddie show for very little kids where the bad guy just easily teams up with our heroes and there is no conflict.
I know you're up to something. You're the enemy. The enemy never just wants to hang out. If these losers want to waste their time with your lame butt, fine.
Actually, I take that back. Even shows for very little kids do a better job than this. I mean, I felt far more of a conflict when the Powerpuff Girls said to Professor Utonium that we cannot team up with Mojo Jojo than I did with Bucky saying that we should not team up with Zemo. And do you know what? I am adding this part of the video after I finish editing the whole binge watch review, but given the massacre and genocide that is going on in Palestine, it makes the political messages that Disney and Marvel are trying to preach in this show null and void. And it's the hypocrisy of the messages that Disney are preaching that really gets to me. We are going to preach to you about how we should treat one another and how we should all contribute into making a more inclusive and accepting society. Now excuse us whilst we go shoot our movie next to a Muslim concentration camp and thank the tyrants for letting us film there. We are also going to preach to you that you should speak out and help the less fortunate and not be silent. Now let's stay silent and force our actors to stay silent about the less fortunate that are currently undergoing genocide. Oh, and just to fool people into thinking that we aren't all that bad, hey look, we are going to cast a Muslim character in our next film. That is disgusting, and they are not fooling anyone. Aside from harshly and aggressively responding to fans on Twitter and calling them sexist and woman haters, they stay completely silent when it matters like a bunch of cowards. And whilst they accuse us of being horrible toxic fans, they go ahead and quietly try to film next to a concentration camp. The absolute nerve! Even the most toxic of fans don't even compare to the evil that Disney have taken part in. From now on, when movies or TV shows preach about politics, I'm going to account them very harshly now, as the time we are in has shown a whole other level of hypocrisy from Hollywood that I didn't think was possible, and this show will forever be known to me as a bastardized contradiction. This might seem like a tangent, but honestly, this episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier has aged terribly in a matter of a couple weeks. But look, we are going to represent a Muslim character in our next MCU movie. We are really pushing the boundaries of representation. See, we are representing everyone. Honestly, given your blatant hypocrisy, you can take this whole fake diversity and preaching of how we should treat each other and with Thor's mighty hammer, shove it up your ass. This episode originally got a 6 out of 10 from me, but because of the message that they are strongly trying to convey in this episode and then don't act upon only weeks after they have preached it, this episode now gets a 1 out of 10, with my first ever honorary you to Disney. The episode on its own is okay, but when you take into account the message it is trying to convey, the score goes all the way down. Anyway, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier show is forgettable, and as each day goes by, I forget about it more and more, and it doesn't leave any impact on me. A common opinion I also share about these two MCU shows so far is that I've seen them once, and I have no desire to see them in their entirety again. And honestly, I just don't want to watch these MCU shows anymore, guys. There are just too many obvious problems, and it hurts my brain to analyze them because there are just so many problems where there shouldn't be, and other people aren't even bringing them up. It's like they are deliberately trying to avoid them or make excuses for them just because it's the MCU. Also, I don't understand why the actor who plays Walker is getting death threats. This is nothing new, but usually for an actor to get harassed like this, they need to play truly despicable characters. But I didn't think he was anywhere near evil enough to be considered despicable. I mean, if certain people think this character is so evil that you would actually want to go out there and harass the actor, then the MCU has turned you soft, because you don't know what true evil is. But yeah, Loki is the next Disney Plus show, and honestly, I'm not bothered to watch and review it. If you guys really want me to, I might do it, but I really have lost interest in these shows. Especially because Falcon the Winter Soldier was the show I was looking the most forward to, and although it is better than WandaVision, it is still a massive disappointment. So that's it for another binge watch video, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Falcon the Winter Soldier, and let me know if you agree with the complaints I had, because this show has loads of obvious problems and no one brings them up. They either completely ignore them or just make excuses for them. And you know that they would have brought these problems up if they were in a non-MCU project. So there's a huge double standard with the MCU that I really can't stand. So, thanks for watching another video, guys. And for those of you wondering, I have plenty more trailer reactions on my Patreon coming up, and it will just cost you $1 a month to gain access to those. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see all of you very soon. Take care.